It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. Just a father and his daughter, a few hours away from satellites, servers, and the endless ping of notifications. No meetings, no headlines, no expectations. Just snow-covered pines, the crunch of boots on fresh powder, and maybe, if they were lucky, a glimpse of an elk at dawn. He'd promised her this trip months ago, back when the world still felt like it was spinning too fast for either of them to catch their breath. She'd been studying hard, juggling school and music and the strange, heavy weight of growing up in a family everyone seemed to have an opinion about. He, on the other hand, spent most days solving problems that felt like they belonged in science fiction. Rockets, tunnels under cities, cars that drove themselves. But here, in this rented cabin tucked deep in the Montana backcountry, none of that mattered. Here, he was just Dad, and she was just his kid, wrapped in an oversized flannel and laughing at his terrible attempts to start a campfire. The cabin had no Wi-Fi, no smart speakers, not even reliable cell service. At first, she'd rolled her eyes. How am I supposed to text Maya if my phone dies? But by the second morning, she'd traded her screen for a pair of binoculars, scanning the ridgeline for movement. By the third, she was helping him chop wood, her gloves stiff with frost, cheeks pink from the cold. On Saturday, they decided to take the SUV down a Forest Service road to a frozen lake he'd read about in an old guidebook. It's supposed to be completely still, he'd said, like glass under the snow. She'd grinned. Like your brain after 3 cups of coffee? He'd laughed, really laughed, and for a moment the lines on his face softened. The drive started beautifully. Sunlight filtered through the trees, turning the snow into something that glittered like crushed diamonds. The road was empty. No other cars, no tire tracks, just silence and the low hum of the electric motor. She played a playlist of indie folk songs she'd made just for this trip, and he didn't complain once, even when the singer's voice cracked on a high note. But the weather in these mountains had a mind of its own. What began as a few lazy snowflakes swirling in the air turned, within an hour, into a full-blown blizzard. The sky went from pale gray to an angry swirling white. Wind howled through the pines, bending them like saplings. Visibility dropped so fast it felt like someone had pulled a curtain across the world. Okay, he said, voice calm but eyes sharp on the road. We're turning back, she nodded, pulling her jacket tighter. The music had stopped. Now there was only the thump of snow hitting the windshield and the soft whir of the wipers struggling to keep up. But the road behind them was already vanishing. Snow filled their tracks almost as soon as they made them. The GPS flickered, then went dark. Low battery, weak signal, or both. He tapped the screen. Nothing. Don't worry, he said, more to himself than to her. We'll just follow the road back to the main turnoff. Except the road wasn't clear anymore. The snow piled higher, drifting across the asphalt like slow-moving waves. The SUV's tires spun slightly on a patch of black ice, and for a heartbeat, the whole vehicle slid sideways. He gripped the wheel, muscles tense, and gently eased off the accelerator. The car straightened, but the confidence in his voice had dimmed. 10 minutes later it happened, a sharp curve, hidden beneath fresh snow. The tires lost traction completely. The SUV fishtailed, then lurched off the road, nosing into a snowbank with a soft, muffled crunch. The engine shut off automatically, a safety feature. Silence rushed in, thick and sudden. For a few seconds neither of them moved. Then she exhaled long and slow. Are we stuck? He tried the ignition. The dashboard lit up, but the motor didn't turn over. Battery's fine, he muttered. But the wheels are buried. He opened his door, stepped out into knee-deep snow and assessed the situation. The front end was sunk deep. The rear wheels lifted slightly off the ground. No way to drive out. Back inside, he brushed snow from his coat. We'll wait it out, he said, forcing lightness into his tone. Storms like this usually blow through in a few hours. She nodded, but her eyes kept darting to the windows, where the snow now fell so thickly it was like being inside a shaken snow globe. He pulled out his phone. No signal, not even a single bar. He tried the emergency satellite feature, nothing. The storm was too intense, the trees too dense. They were on their own. So they did what people do when the world closes in. They made the best of it. He dug out the emergency blanket from the trunk, wrapped it around her shoulders. She found 2 protein bars in the glove compartment and split one with him. They talked. About her piano recital coming up, about the book she was reading, about whether aliens would prefer electric cars or flying saucers. He told her a story from when he was her age, lost in the woods near Pretoria, surviving on wild figs and sheer stubbornness. She laughed, and for a while the cold didn't feel so sharp. But as the hours passed, the temperature inside the car dropped. The heater had been running on battery power, and now it sputtered, then died. Their breath turned to mist. Frost crept up the windows, sealing them in a cocoon of white. She shivered. "How long do you think it'll last?" He didn't answer right away. Outside, the wind screamed like something alive. "I don't know," he admitted quietly, "but we'll be okay." He meant it. But even as he said it, a new sound cut through the wind, a low guttural growl, so faint it might have been imagination. Both of them froze. Then another. Closer. He turned slowly toward the driver's side window. Through a small patch of unfrosted glass, he saw them, shadows moving in the snow. Lean shapes low to the ground, circling, wolves, not one or two, but a whole pack. Their eyes caught the dim interior light of the car, glowing like amber coals in the storm. They didn't run. They didn't flinch. They just watched. His hand found hers in the dark. Her fingers were ice cold. "It's okay," he whispered, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "They're probably just curious." But wolves didn't circle out of curiosity. Not in a blizzard. Not when they were this hungry. One of them stepped forward, larger than the others, its fur matted with snow. It stopped just 10 feet from the front bumper, head low, ears pinned back. Then it howled. The sound wasn't mournful. It was a warning, a claim. And in that moment, the quiet weekend vanished completely. The cabin, the lake, the laughter, it all felt like a dream from another life. Now there was only this: a broken-down car, a father, his daughter, and the wild, watching them through the storm. He reached for the horn and pressed it. The blast shattered the silence. The wolves flinched but didn't scatter. Instead, they backed off just enough to regroup, then returned, more determined than before. He tried the headlights. They flickered on, casting long, trembling beams into the snow. The wolves blinked but held their ground. "They know we're trapped," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't argue. Outside, the blizzard raged on. Inside, the air grew colder with every breath. He thought about the tools in the trunk: a tire iron, a flashlight, a first aid kit. Nothing that could stop a pack of wolves. Nothing that could melt the snow or summon help, but he had something else: time. And his mind. He'd built companies from nothing. He'd stared down failure more times than he could count. This was just another problem. A brutal, primal one, but still a problem. He turned to his daughter. "Listen," he said, voice steady now. "We're going to get through this. But we need to stay calm. No sudden moves. No yelling. We conserve heat. We stay alert," she nodded, eyes wide but focused. "What if they try to get in?" "Then we make it hard for them," he said. "We use the lights, the horn. Anything loud or bright. Wolves don't like chaos," she swallowed. "Okay," minutes ticked by. The wolves paced. The wind howled. The car's battery ticked lower. He knew they couldn't stay here forever. Hypothermia would set in long before the storm passed. And if the wolves grew desperate enough, he didn't finish the thought. Instead, he pulled out his phone one last time. Still no signal, but the battery was at 12%. He opened the flashlight app, then the camera. Maybe if he recorded something, a message, coordinates, anything, it could be recovered later. But as he held the phone up, angling it toward the window, something strange happened. One of the wolves, different from the others, older with a patch of silver fur along its muzzle, stopped pacing. It looked directly at the car, not with hunger, not with aggression, with something almost like recognition. It stood apart from the pack, watching, ears forward. Then, as if on cue, it turned and trotted a few yards away, then stopped again, glancing back, almost like it was waiting. He frowned. "That's odd." "What?" she asked. "That one. It's not acting like the rest." She peered through the frost. "Maybe it's the alpha?" "Maybe," he said. But something about it felt different, calmer, smarter. The wind shifted. Snow swirled in new patterns. The pack grew restless again, but the silver-furred wolf let out a short, sharp bark, and they paused. For the first time since the SUV went off the road, he felt a flicker of something other than fear. Hope. But hope wouldn't keep them warm, and the battery was down to 8%. He took a deep breath. "We need a plan. If we're going to move, it has to be soon." She looked at him, scared but trusting. Where would we go? He pointed toward a dark ridge barely visible through the storm. Earlier I saw a rock formation, looked like an outcrop. Might offer some shelter. Better than this metal box. But the wolves. We'll use the flashlight. The horn in short bursts. And we stay together always, she nodded. Okay, let's do it. Outside, the silver wolf watched and the storm raged on. Night fell like a heavy blanket, smothering what little light remained. The blizzard hadn't eased. It had only grown angrier, howling through the trees like something ancient and furious. Inside the SUV, the air had turned brittle with cold. Every breath hung in front of them like a ghost, and the silence between father and daughter had grown thick, not from distance, but from the weight of what lay outside. The wolves hadn't left. If anything, they'd grown bolder. Earlier, they'd kept their distance, circling just beyond the reach of the headlights. But now, with darkness pressing in and the car's battery fading, the pack crept closer. One of them, a younger male with a torn ear, sniffed at the front tire, then lifted its head and stared straight through the windshield. Its eyes weren't just bright. They were knowing. Hungry, yes, but also patient. He kept one hand on the horn, finger resting lightly on the center of the steering wheel. The other held his daughter's, their gloves damp with condensation. Neither spoke. Words felt too loud, too risky, as if sound itself might tip the balance. Then, without warning, the young wolf lunged, not at the door, but at the side mirror. Its teeth clamped down with a sharp crack, snapping the plastic housing clean off. The sound was jarringly loud in the stillness, and his daughter flinched hard, her breath catching in her throat. "It's testing us," he whispered. She nodded, eyes wide. "What do we do?" He didn't answer right away. His mind raced through options, discarding most as useless. They couldn't stay here much longer. The temperature inside had dropped below freezing. Their jackets weren't made for overnight exposure in a Montana blizzard, and the car, once a sanctuary, was now a trap. Metal walls offered no real protection against a determined predator, especially not with a shattered window seal and a dying battery. "We move," he said finally. Now, her voice trembled, but there was steel underneath it. "Before it gets worse, before we can't move at all." He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the flashlight, small but bright. He also grabbed the tire iron, its cold metal biting into his palm even through his glove. Not much against a pack, but better than nothing. "Here," he said, handing her the emergency blanket. "Wrap it tight. Keep your core warm." She did as she was told, tucking the reflective material around her shoulders like a cloak. He double-checked the zipper on her jacket, pulled her hood up, and gave her a look that said everything without words. "Stay close. Don't panic. Trust me." She gave a small nod. He took a deep breath, then pressed the horn. Short, sharp bursts, 3 in a row. The sound ripped through the storm, and the wolves scattered for a moment, ears flattening, tails tucked. But they didn't run far. Within seconds, they regrouped, this time forming a loose semicircle around the front of the vehicle. "They're hurting us," he murmured, or waiting for them to make a mistake. He cracked the driver's door open just a few inches. Wind and snow rushed in like a flood. He winced but held firm. "On my signal," he said. "We go fast. Straight toward that ridge. See the dark shape through the trees? We don't look back." "We don't stop," she nodded, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. He counted to 3 in his head. Then he shoved the door open all the way, stepped out into the storm, and blasted the horn one last time with his free hand. The wolves yelped and leapt back, but only for a heartbeat. "Go!" he shouted. They ran. Snow came up to their shins, then their knees in places where drifts had built up. Every step was a battle. The wind tore at their clothes, stung their faces like needles. He kept his body slightly ahead of hers. Tire iron raised, scanning left and right. Behind them, the wolves gave chase, not sprinting, but loping steadily, confidently, as if they knew the humans wouldn't get far. He could hear their paws thudding softly in the snow, their breath sharp and rhythmic, closer than he wanted. "Keep moving," he called over his shoulder. She didn't answer, but he heard her labored breathing, the crunch of her boots. Good. She was right behind him, 50 yards, then 60. The ridge loomed ahead, a jagged line of rock jutting out from the mountainside, partially shielded by pine trees. If they could reach it, they might find a crevice, an overhang, anything to break the wind and give them a fighting chance. But the wolves weren't letting them get that far. A dark shape darted from the left, fast, low, silent, until the last second. He swung the tire iron blindly, more to create space than to hit. The wolf dodged, snarling, then circled back. Another came from the right, cutting off their path slightly. They were being flanked. He stopped abruptly, pulling his daughter behind him. "Back to back," he said. They turned, pressing their shoulders together, each facing half the circle. The flashlight beam cut through the snow, catching the eyes of 3, then 4 wolves as they closed in. Their fur was matted with ice. Their ribs showed faintly beneath their coats. This wasn't aggression born of territory. It was desperation. Starvation. One of them, a female with a scar across her muzzle, took a step forward, lips curling back from yellowed teeth. He raised the tire iron. "Stay back." His voice cracked with cold. But it carried. The wolf hesitated. Then, from behind them, a new sound. A howl. Not from the pack. Deeper. Older. Slower. It rolled down from the ridge above, cutting through the wind like a blade. Every wolf in the circle froze. Even the scarred female lowered her head, ears flicking backward. He turned slightly, keeping his daughter shielded, and looked up. There, silhouetted against the storm-lit sky, stood the silver-furred wolf, the one that had watched them earlier. It stood tall on a rocky ledge, unmoving, its gaze fixed not on them but on the pack below. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the silver wolf let out another howl, shorter this time, sharper. A command, and to his astonishment the pack obeyed. One by one they backed away, tails low, eyes flicking between the humans and the figure on the ridge. The scarred female lingered longest, her stare locked with his for a breathless second. Then she turned and trotted off into the trees. Within moments, the clearing was empty except for the 2 of them and the lone wolf above. He didn't lower the tire iron. Not yet. What just happened? His daughter whispered, her voice raw with cold and disbelief. "I don't know," he admitted. The silver wolf watched them a moment longer. Then slowly it turned and walked along the ridge just far enough to be visible, then stopped again. It looked back, waiting. "Is it leading us?" she asked, squinting through the snow. He didn't want to believe it. Wolves didn't lead lost humans to safety. That was the stuff of children's books and old legends, and yet... He glanced at the SUV, now just a dark hump in the distance, half buried in snow. Going back wasn't an option. Staying here meant freezing. Following a wild animal into the storm seemed insane. But sometimes, in the wild, the line between madness and survival blurred. "Let's go," he said. They moved carefully this time. Not running, but walking with purpose. The silver wolf stayed ahead, always just visible through the swirling snow, never too close, never too far. It moved with a quiet certainty, as if it knew exactly where it was going. After 10 minutes, the wind lessened slightly as they entered a narrow gully between 2 rock faces. The snow here was shallower, packed down by something, maybe animals, maybe time. The wolf paused at the entrance, then disappeared around a bend. They followed, and that's when they saw it. Tucked into the base of the ridge, half hidden by snow and overhanging stone, was a small wooden structure. Weathered, crooked, barely standing, but unmistakably human-made. A ranger's cabin. The door hung slightly ajar. The silver wolf stood beside it, watching them. He approached slowly, tire iron still in hand, heart pounding. He pushed the door open with his boot. Inside, darkness. But the smell, old wood, dry air, the faint trace of kerosene, told him it was empty. Safe. He turned to thank the wolf. But it was already gone. Vanished into the storm as if it had never been there. His daughter stepped inside, shaking snow from her hair. "Do you think it knew this place was here?" He didn't answer. He just closed the door behind them, blocking out the wind, the cold, the howling dark. Inside it was freezing, but not deadly. There was a rusted wood stove in the corner, a cot with a moth-eaten blanket, a shelf with a few cans of beans and a dusty lantern. On the wall, a faded map and a calendar from 3 years ago. He struck a match, thankfully dry in his inner pocket, and lit the lantern. The warm glow filled the tiny space, casting long shadows. She sank onto the cot, pulling the emergency blanket tighter. I can't feel my toes. He knelt, unzipped her boots, and rubbed her feet gently through her socks. Circulation's still good, he said. You'll be okay. She looked up at him, eyes glistening, not from tears but from exhaustion and wonder. That wolf, it saved us, didn't it? He sat back on his heels, staring at the door. I don't know how, or why, but yeah, I think it did. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but here, in this forgotten cabin, they were alive, and for the first time in hours, they could breathe. He found a half-full can of fuel near the stove, poured a little into the reservoir, and lit it. The metal groaned as it warmed, but soon a soft heat began to rise. She curled up on the cot, eyes heavy. Do you think anyone's looking for us? They will be, he said. The car's GPS sent a last ping before it died. They'll find the SUV, then they'll search. She nodded, already drifting. Good. He sat beside her, watching the lantern flicker. His mind replayed every moment. The crash, the wolves, the impossible silver figure on the ridge. It didn't make sense. Not logically. But out here, logic wasn't always the rule. Sometimes the wild had its own kind of mercy. He pulled the moth-eaten blanket over her, then leaned back against the wall, listening to the wind howl outside. Somewhere out there, a lone wolf moved through the storm, and for reasons he might never understand, it had chosen to help them. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, and for the first time that night, he let himself hope. Dawn came not with a sunrise, but with a softening of the dark, a gray light seeping through cracks in the cabin's warped wooden shutters. The blizzard had quieted to a whisper, leaving behind a world buried under deep, untouched snow. Inside, the air still held a bite, but the stove had done its job. The worst of the cold had been held at bay. She stirred first, blinking against the dim light. Her body ached from sleeping on the thin cot, and her throat felt dry, but she was warm. Alive. She turned her head and saw him sitting against the wall, knees drawn up, eyes open but distant. He hadn't slept. Not really. You okay? She asked, her voice rough. He nodded, offering a tired smile. Better now. They shared the last of the water from their bottle, just a few sips each, and ate one of the dusty canned beans straight from the tin. It wasn't much, but it was something. Outside, silence reigned. No wind, no howls, just the occasional soft creak of snow settling on the roof. He stood, stretching stiff muscles, and peered out the window. The world was white in every direction. The trees bowed under thick layers of snow. The SUV was gone from view, swallowed by the drifts. But something else caught his eye, tracks. Not human, wolf tracks. A single set, leading away from the cabin and up the ridge. They were fresh. His breath fogged the glass as he traced the path with his eyes. It came back, he murmured. She joined him at the window. The silver one? Yeah. They stood there for a long moment, not speaking. There was no explaining it. No scientific model or logical theory that could account for a wild animal returning to check on stranded strangers, and yet the tracks were real. The cabin was real. Their survival was real. We should try to signal for help, he said finally. While the weather's clear, she nodded. They bundled up again. Layers of jackets, scarves wrapped tight, gloves pulled over numb fingers. Stepping outside felt like walking into a frozen dream. The snow crunched underfoot, crisp and deep. The air was so still it felt sacred. He climbed onto the cabin's roof using a rusted ladder leaning against the side and tied the emergency blanket to the highest point he could reach, a crooked antenna pole. The reflective silver material snapped in the faint breeze, a bright flag against the endless white. Back on the ground, he gathered dry branches from under the eaves and built a small pyre in the clearing. No fire yet, just kindling ready in case they heard a plane or saw distant movement. Hours passed. No engines. No voices. No rescue. Just silence. By midday, hunger gnawed at them again and the cold began to creep back in. They retreated to the cabin, huddled near the stove, conserving the last of the fuel. That's when she noticed something on the shelf behind the lantern, a small oil-stained journal. She opened it carefully. The pages were brittle, the handwriting faded but legible. It's from the ranger, she said softly. Says he used this cabin during winter patrols. Last entry was 3 years ago. She read aloud. Saw the old silver mail again today. Still leading the pack, still keeping them away from the lower trails. Smart animal, almost too smart. Feels like he knows when I'm out here. Leaves deer bones near the door sometimes, like an offering. Or a warning. She looked up, eyes wide. He knew about the silver wolf. He took the journal, flipping through pages filled with notes on weather, animal sightings, supply runs, and again mentions of the same wolf, always described as calm, watchful, different. One entry chilled him. Lost 2 sheep last winter. Pack got bold, but after the silver one showed up, they never came near the fence again, like he told them to stay back. He closed the journal slowly. This wolf has been around a long time, and it's not like the others. She hugged her knees. Do you think it's protecting us? I think, he said carefully, it's deciding whether we're worth protecting. The idea hung in the air, strange but not impossible. Out here, far from cities and schedules and algorithms, the rules were older, simpler, maybe even kinder. But kindness wouldn't keep them alive forever. Their supplies were nearly gone. The stove fuel would last 1 more night, maybe 2. And if no one found them soon... He didn't finish the thought. Instead, he stood and walked to the door. We need to move again. She looked up, startled. Where? Higher, he said. The ranger's map showed a fire lookout tower about 2 miles northeast. If we can reach it, we'll have a better view. Maybe even a radio, she bit her lip. What if the pack comes back? They might, he admitted. But we can't wait here forever. And if the silver wolf is still watching, maybe it'll help again. It was a gamble. A desperate one. But staying meant slow surrender to the cold. They packed what little they had. The journal, the flashlight, the tire iron, the last protein bar split in half. Before leaving, he scribbled a note on the cabin wall with charcoal from the stove. Stranded. Headed to lookout tower. Follow tracks. Then they stepped back into the wild. The snow was easier to walk through now that it had settled, but every step was still exhausting. They followed the ridgeline, using the sun, pale and weak behind thick clouds, as their guide. For the first hour, nothing moved. No birds, no tracks, just them and the endless white. Then around mid-afternoon, she stopped. Do you hear that? He froze, at first nothing. Then a low rhythmic thumping, distant but growing louder. A helicopter. Hope surged in his chest. He grabbed the emergency blanket, waved it wildly overhead. Over here, he shouted, though he knew they couldn't hear him. The sound grew closer. The thumping became a roar, and then there it was, a red and white chopper cutting through the sky maybe half a mile east. They're searching, she cried, jumping up and down. But the helicopter didn't turn. It flew straight, then began to descend, toward the valley where the SUV was buried. They're going to the car, he realized. They'll look there first, which meant they might never think to search the ridge. Unless he looked around frantically. His eyes landed on a patch of dry brush near a rock. Help me, he called, already pulling branches together. They built a quick signal fire, piling on green pine boughs for smoke. He struck the last match, and flames licked upward. Thick white smoke billowed into the sky. For a heart-stopping minute, nothing happened. Then, the helicopter banked sharply. It turned. It saw them. He waved the blanket again, tears stinging his eyes from the smoke and relief. The chopper circled once, then hovered, lowering slowly into a nearby clearing. A door slid open. A rescuer in an orange suit stepped out. Waving them forward, they ran, stumbling, laughing, crying, through the snow toward salvation. But just as they reached the edge of the clearing, a sound stopped them cold, a howl, not from the valley, not from behind, from the ridge above. They turned. There, standing on the highest rock, silhouetted against the fading light, was the silver wolf. It didn't move, didn't snarl, just watched. The rescuer called out, "Come on, hurry." He hesitated. Then he raised a hand, not in fear, but in thanks. The wolf dipped its head once and vanished into the trees. Minutes later, they were strapped into the helicopter, wrapped in thermal blankets, sipping hot broth from a thermos. The rescuer radioed in. Got them. Both alive. No injuries. As the chopper lifted off, she pressed her face to the window, searching the ridge below. Do you think we'll ever see it again? She asked. He didn't answer right away. He just watched the wilderness shrink beneath them. The cabin, the tracks, the silent mountains that had held them, tested them, and, in the end, let them go. Maybe not, he said softly. But I'll never forget it. And in that moment, high above the snow and the trees and the hidden paths of the wild, they both knew something had changed. They'd gone into the storm as father and daughter, lost and afraid. They were coming out as something more, bound not just by blood, but by a secret the mountains had shared with them alone. And somewhere down below, a silver wolf walked through the quiet snow, its story untold, its purpose unknown, except to those who had seen its eyes in the storm and lived to remember. Back in the world of paved roads, heated buildings, and constant noise, everything felt too bright, too loud, too fast. The hospital room was clean and warm, the doctors kind, the nurses efficient, but it all seemed unreal, like stepping into a movie set after living in a dream. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like laundry detergent, watching snow fall gently over the parking lot. It was the same snow that had nearly buried them, but here it looked soft, harmless, almost decorative. He sat across from her, sipping black coffee from a paper cup, his face still shadowed with exhaustion. They hadn't talked much since the rescue. Not really. There were interviews to give, calls to return, a dozen people asking the same questions. How did you survive? Were you scared? Did you really see wolves? They gave careful answers, truthful but trimmed, leaving out the part about the silver wolf, the cabin, the way it had watched them like it understood. That part felt too fragile to share with strangers, too sacred. Now, alone at last, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything they hadn't said. Finally, she spoke. Do you think anyone will believe us? If we tell the whole story? He set the cup down. Does it matter? She thought about that. Maybe not, but it feels wrong to pretend it didn't happen. He nodded slowly. It happened. That's enough. Outside, a snowplow rumbled past, clearing the drive. Normal life resuming, but nothing felt normal anymore. The next few days blurred together. Reporters camped outside their home. News vans lined the street. Headlines called it a miraculous survival and a father's bravery in the face of nature's fury. No one mentioned the wolf. No one could. There was no proof, just two sets of human tracks leading from the SUV to the cabin and then to the ridge. The rest was snow, wind, and silence. Some people whispered that they'd imagined it, that fear and cold had twisted their minds. Others said wolves don't behave that way, that it was impossible, but they knew better. One evening, while sorting through the few belongings that had come back with them, their soaked jackets, the tire iron, the journal from the cabin, he found something tucked into the inner pocket of his coat. A small, smooth stone, gray with a streak of silver running through it. He didn't remember picking it up, but he knew where it came from. He showed it to her without a word. She held it in her palm, turning it over. It looks like him. Neither of them said the wolf's name. They didn't need to. A week after they returned, she stopped scrolling through her phone during dinner. Instead, she asked, Do you think he's still out there? He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. I hope so. I keep dreaming about the ridge, she said quietly. About standing there, looking up and seeing him on the rock, like he was waiting for us to understand something. What do you think it was? She shrugged. Maybe that we're not the only ones who care. He looked at her, really looked, and saw something new in her eyes. Not just relief, not just youth, but a kind of quiet knowing, the kind that comes from facing something ancient and walking away changed. That night he sat at his desk long after the house had gone quiet. He opened a private browser window and typed in a few words: Montana Wildlife Conservation, Wolf Habitat Protection, Ranger Station Funding. He didn't post about it, didn't announce it, just clicked donate on 3 different sites, entered his information, and closed the tab. It wasn't repayment. You couldn't repay something like that. But it was respect. A month later, she signed up for a weekend volunteer program at a wildlife sanctuary 2 states away. She didn't tell many people, just packed a bag, kissed her mom goodbye, and left before sunrise. At the sanctuary, she helped clean enclosures, prepared food for injured foxes and owls, and sat for hours watching a rescued wolf pace the edge of its habitat. It never came close to the fence, never made eye contact, but on her last morning, As she stood by the viewing platform with her hands in her pockets, it stopped, looked right at her, and for a second, just a second, she swore it tilted its head, like it recognized something in her. She didn't tell anyone about that either. Back home, he started taking walks in the early mornings before the world woke up. No phone, no headphones, just boots, a jacket, and the sound of his own breath in the cold air. Sometimes he'd stop at the edge of a local nature preserve and stand there listening. He never saw a wolf, not once, but he always felt watched, and that was enough. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, just a Montana postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in neat slanted script. I read the news reports. Saw your names. I used to patrol those mountains. Knew that cabin. Knew the wolf you're not talking about. His name among the old rangers was Kale, means keeper in an old tongue. He's been around longer than any of us. Some say he's not just one wolf, that he's something older, something that chooses when to appear. I don't know if that's true, but I do know this. In all my years, I never saw him help anyone who didn't deserve it. You must have shown him something worth saving. A friend of the ridge. He read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in the same drawer as the silver-streaked stone. That night, over dinner, he finally told her about the letter. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she just said, "So his name was Kyle." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe that's just what people called him." She smiled. "I like it." Time passed. Life moved on. School, work, birthdays, holidays. The story faded from the news. People forgot, but they didn't. On the anniversary of the blizzard, they drove back, not to the exact spot, the road was still closed in winter, but to a nearby overlook. They brought 2 thermoses of hot chocolate and sat on a bench, watching the mountains turn gold in the late afternoon light. No words were needed. They just sat, side by side, remembering the cold, the fear, the howl that cut through the storm, and the quiet presence that stood between them and the end. Later, as they walked back to the car, she stopped and looked up at the ridge in the distance. "Do you ever wonder if he's watching us right now?" He followed her gaze. The wind stirred the pines. "A hawk circled high above, I hope so," he said. And somewhere, deep in the wild, a silver-furred shape moved through the trees. Unseen, unnamed but never forgotten. Years passed, but the storm never really left them. It wasn't something they talked about often, not in interviews, not at dinner parties, not even with close friends. The story had become too personal, too woven into the quiet spaces between their words. To outsiders, it was just a survival tale, a billionaire and his daughter stranded in a blizzard, rescued by luck and grit. But to them, it was something else entirely. It was the moment the world stopped being a series of problems to solve and became something alive, watchful, wild, and strangely kind. She grew older, taller, more sure of herself. She still played piano, but now she also spent summers tracking animal migrations in the Rockies, her boots caked with mud, her notebook filled with sketches of paw prints and weather patterns. She never chased wolves, never tried to find him, but she learned their language, the way they moved, the calls they made, the paths they kept. And sometimes in the stillness before dawn, she'd pause on a trail, heart pounding, certain she felt eyes on her from the trees. He, too, changed in ways no one expected. The headlines still called him a tech visionary, a disruptor, a man who dreamed of Mars. But those who knew him best noticed the shift, the way he'd fall silent during board meetings when a bird flew past the window, or how he'd cancel a high-stakes call to drive out to a wildlife corridor meeting in Montana. He started funding projects no one saw coming. Land trusts to protect wolf habitats, solar-powered ranger stations, programs that taught kids to read animal tracks instead of just screens. He never said why. He didn't have to. One spring, a documentary crew approached them, not for a flashy exposé, but for a quiet film about human connection to the natural world. They said no at first. But then the director, a woman who'd grown up on a ranch near Yellowstone, told them she'd heard rumors. Not about fame or danger, but about a wolf that didn't act like a wolf. They agreed, but only if the story stayed true. No dramatization, no fake howls, just what happened. The film never aired widely. It played at a few small festivals, won a quiet award, and then faded into the background. But for those who saw it, it left a mark. Not because of who was in it, but because of what it suggested, that the wild isn't just something to conquer or fear. Sometimes it watches back, and sometimes it chooses to help. Then came the letter from the U.S. Forest Service. It was formal, polite, and brief. A new ranger station was being built near the old cabin site, part of a larger effort to monitor wildlife and prevent human-wildlife conflict. They'd heard about his quiet donations, her fieldwork. Would they be willing to lend their names to the project? Not as celebrities, but as people who'd been there. They said yes. The dedication ceremony was held on a crisp October morning, the mountains glowing amber under a clear sky. There were speeches, a ribbon cutting, local kids holding handmade signs that read, "Protect our wild neighbors." She stood beside him, not as his daughter, the public figure, but as someone who understood what this place meant. After the crowd thinned, they walked the old trail together, slower now, not running for their lives, but walking with reverence. The cabin was gone, reclaimed by time and snow, but the ridge remained. The same ridge where a silver shape had stood and changed everything. She stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked up. "Do you think he'd like this?" He followed her gaze. "I think he'd be glad we remembered." They didn't see him that day. They never did again, not with their eyes at least. But that didn't matter. Some presences don't need to be seen to be felt. Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. She published a book, not a memoir, but a guide to coexisting with wildlife, filled with stories from rangers, biologists, and indigenous elders who'd lived alongside wolves for generations. She dedicated it to the keeper of the ridge. He, in turn, quietly shifted the focus of one of his foundations. Instead of just building the future off-world, he began investing in the wild heart of this one, rewilding degraded lands, supporting anti-poaching patrols, funding research into non-lethal ways to protect livestock from predators. Critics called it sentimental. He didn't care, because he knew something they didn't. Mercy wasn't just a human trait. One winter evening, years after the blizzard, she came home with snow in her hair and a small wooden carving in her hand. She'd met an old woodworker in a mountain town who said he'd been carving wolves his whole life. "This one," he told her, "just came out of the wood like it was waiting." She placed it on the shelf beside the silver-streaked stone. It wasn't perfect. The lines were rough, the eyes simple dots. But when the light hit it just right, it looked like it was watching the room, calm, steady, ancient. He picked it up, ran his thumb over the grain. "It's him," he said softly. She nodded. "I know." They didn't need proof. They had something better, memory, gratitude, and a bond forged in snow and silence. People still ask if the story's true. Some say it's too strange to believe. A lone wolf guiding humans to safety? That doesn't happen. Nature isn't like that. But those who've spent time in the wild know better. They know that animals sense things we can't. That survival isn't always about teeth and hunger. It's also about balance, instinct, and sometimes something that looks a lot like choice, and maybe, just maybe, the wild decides who deserves a second chance. Now, when he speaks to young engineers or she teaches kids about conservation, they don't lead with data or diagrams. They start with a question. Have you ever felt like the world was watching you? Not in a scary way. Not like judgment, but like care, like you mattered not because of what you owned or achieved, but simply because you were there, alive, breathing, part of something bigger. That's what the storm taught them. Not how to survive, but how to belong. On the coldest nights, when the wind howls just right, they still step outside, not to look for anything, just to listen. And sometimes, just sometimes, the wind carries a sound that isn't quite wind. A low, distant howl, not threatening, not lonely, just there, like a reminder, like a promise, like a friend saying, I'm still here. And in that moment, standing under a sky full of stars, with snow falling soft and silent around them, they know they were never really alone and they never will be.